This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. For our last show of 2022, we are beginning with insight from K-State and Washburn University School of Law professor Roger McEowen. He discusses utilizing charitable remainder trusts as a part of retirement planning for producers. We're also joined by a very familiar voice for longtime Agriculture Today listeners. Gus van Der Hoeven provides his one-of-a-kind commentary on life in Kansas for a festive segment reflecting on the holiday season this year. We end with our friends from the Beef Cattle Institute for our last Ask the Expert segment this year. This week, we are joined by K-State experts Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster, answering a listener's question on how they should manage their mineral supplementation plan to set them up for success with breeding. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are closing out our ag law segments for the year with Roger McEowen. Of course, he is a professor at K-State as well as Washburn University School of Law. So, Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Samantha, and good to be in person with you.
Yeah, a little different. We're in studio today instead of being over the phone, so that's refreshing. So, today you wanted to talk about charitable remainder trusts. So, let's start with what exactly is that?
Well, a charitable remainder trust actually is a pretty good planning tool that we can integrate into a farmer's estate plan as well as their income tax planning, particularly if they're looking at retiring from farming. Many farmers defer income as a tax planning strategy, and so if I know I'm coming into my last year of farming, it's going to be my last harvest. What I've already done is the previous year's harvest, I've deferred that income into the current year, and now I have this year's harvest. I'm not going to be able to defer that into the next year because I won't be engaged in a trade or business of farming. So if I'm transitioning my business to the next generation, I've kind of got a glitch with respect to my income tax planning because I'm going to hit the off switch on my treadmill that I've been on, what we call the deferral treadmill, for a long time. And so now when I stop, all this income is going to hit me. I'm going to have 2 years worth of crop income in 1 year. And so in that situation, one of the suggestions that we make is you can avoid the sale of that last year's crop and avoid, of course, self-employment tax on that because we won't put it in Schedule F and report it as such. If we create a charitable remainder trust and have the client transfer property, maybe even including the crops, into a charitable remainder trust, then the trust sells it. The transfer does not trigger tax. That's just a transfer to a trust. The trust then sells it, but the trust is not subject to tax because it's a nonprofit entity. It's a charitable entity. And so then the trust will use the income generated by the sale of the assets that have been transferred to the trust to fund an annuity back to the farmer for a term of years or for their life, whatever way it's set up. And often what we do is if they want to retire early from farming and they're starting to draw Social Security benefits, usually, or they haven't yet, and we have an opportunity to delay the receipt of Social Security benefits. So say they want to delay that until they're age 70. And then they retire before that. So we might set up the term of the annuity to end when Social Security benefits begin so that we're not, again, piling up the income. So it's an income tax planning strategy over a number of years where they're going to report the income that they receive each year on the installment basis. And the idea is I'm not going to have income that's going to bump me up into a higher income tax bracket in any given year. That's the theory. And then whatever's left in the trust at the end of the term of the trust is going to go to a charity. So you're going to get a charitable deduction if you do it right, and you're going to spread the income out over the life of the annuity, and you're going to avoid the sale of that last harvest. So you avoid that income, and you avoid self-employment tax.
So it gives just producers several more options, it sounds like. And are there several different types of charitable remainder trusts when it comes to producers thinking about what they need to do?
Yeah, there are two primary ones, a charitable remainder annuity trust and a charitable remainder unit trust, so a CRAT and a CRUT. And they each have different rules. This is highly technical. And so this is something that if a tax preparer hasn't done this before, you don't want to try this the first time alone. You have to partner up with somebody that knows all these technical rules because if you mess it up, the penalties are enormous.
Sure, and we're going to talk through a case of messing it up now, and it's an example of kind of how not to use one of these charitable remainder trusts. So let's talk through the Furrer case.
Yeah, this is a tax court case that was decided recently, and this involved an Indiana farm couple that decided they wanted to create a charitable remainder annuity trust, and so have an annuity come back to them and get a charitable deduction for this. Now, as the opinion starts out, as I started out reading this opinion, it said that the Furrers read an ad in a farm magazine, and I had a sinking feeling that the next paragraph was going to be the equivalent to pushing the flush lever, because this is not going to go well. And indeed, about everything that was done in terms of the setup of the trust and what they were trying to do on the income tax return was absolutely incorrect. It's a sad tale all the way around. And one of the bad things they did is they put a crop in there, which is ordinary income, okay? They put a lot of crop in there, about $1 million worth of soybeans and corn in two separate trusts, because with another technical rule is with an annuity trust. Now, this part they did right. Once you make a contribution, you can't add to it. So once you put your corn crop in, you can't add your bean crop in. It's one contribution, and then you're done. So they had two separate trusts in 2 separate years, but totaling about $1 million of the crop going in. And, of course, the charity's going to sell that to fund the annuities back to them, and they want to claim a charitable deduction for that. Well, you can't with respect to ordinary income property because they don't have any income tax basis in that raised crop. They've already deducted all of the expenses associated with raising the crop. You can't get a charitable deduction greater than what your income tax basis is in the property that you've contributed. So you can't claim a charitable deduction. Now, the kicker in this thing is that they claimed the charitable deduction and the IRS examining agent allowed it, which was incorrect. And so they get this. The IRS agent's report writes it up, said, well, you have a deficiency. We'll allow the charitable deduction, which is completely incorrect. And we're talking 6-figure deduction here. Instead of accepting the agent's report, they filed a petition with the tax court, which is a horrible mistake. Yes, the IRS is making some negative adjustments that are not in your favor, but they are allowing you a huge deduction that you are in no way entitled to. And so whoever's advising them decided, well, we're going to file a petition with the tax court. So what happens when it gets to the tax court, now you've moved away from the IRS agent. Now you get the IRS attorneys that look at this and say, uh-oh, our agent made a mistake. They then make a motion with the tax court to change that because, obviously we were wrong. That should not have been allowed. Court, would you disallow that? The court granted the motion, disallows the charitable deduction. So now, instead of just accepting that and letting a sleeping dog lie, now you've lost the charitable deduction, which is correct, but IRS is going to give it to them. And then it just went downhill from there.
So basically, they pretty much shot themselves in the foot in one way or another.
Yeah, they did on that issue because, again, the point here is if you're going to put a raised crop into a trust, okay, you're avoiding the income tax on the sale of the crop and you're avoiding self-employment tax, but you can't take a charitable deduction. That's all right if you realize that's what's going to happen to you. Well, they had claimed the reason for taking a charitable deduction was they claimed that they had sold the crop to the trust, which established a purchase price basis in the hands of the trust, and so then they could take a charitable deduction. However, by claiming that they sold it to the trust, they should have reported the income on Schedule F as a sale. Well, they didn't do that, so that was wrong. And then when the trust sells the ordinary income property, that generates, under the ordering rules, that generates all ordinary income back to them. It's not favorably taxed at capital gain rates. It's ordinary income. So they messed that up too. This was just a chain of really bad stuff all the way through. And they got hit with penalties, understatement penalties. Now, that's one point they won on because the IRS messed that up. In order for IRS, a revenue agent, to assess penalties for underpayment of tax, and these can be severe. So if I've underreported my income, say, by $100,000, IRS is going to tack on another $20,000. So what was 100 becomes 120. But to do that, Congress changed the rules a few years ago, and the IRS revenue agent has to get their approval from a supervisor to do that. Well, they didn't do that in this situation. The agent messed that up, and so the penalty went away. But here they lost the charitable deduction. They had all ordinary income. It was just a mess all the way through.
A series of mistakes, it sounds like, for sure. So, Roger, if listeners are tuning in and they're thinking, well, this is something that I think I'm going to be approaching in the next several years, or they're in the process of doing it now, What are some steps to make sure they don't mess it up as far as this case goes? What should they be thinking of in their own case?
Well, if you read an ad in a farm magazine that's promoting this, take it to your tax counsel. Take it to your preparer. Take it to somebody to look at. Maybe it's fine. Maybe the ad is fine. Maybe what they're selling is legit. But you want to make sure, and make sure that it's done correctly. This is a highly technical area of tax law. Not every tax preparer is going to know this. And if they don't, they need to get hooked up with somebody that does these things, because this can be a valuable technique. It can also be a disaster if it's done wrong. So make sure that you're talking to somebody that can really help you through this and do it right.
Absolutely. And in terms of determining that, what are some good questions to ask someone if you're interested in doing this?
Well, can I integrate this with my overall income tax planning, estate planning, transition planning for my farm or ranch? What is the impact if I put growing a harvested crop into the trust compared to my equipment, my real estate, land, those types of things? If I want to benefit a charity, I have to understand what types of property will give me a charitable deduction. Just you want an explanation of how this whole concept works. Many people are charitably inclined and would like to do this, but may not understand how this really works. And so they need to kind of have a discussion as to get an explanation as to how this all works, and then to integrate it with your overall estate plan, retirement plan, all those types of things.
Absolutely. The more planning that goes into it and the more you understand it, the better in this case for sure, especially when you think about your retirement. That's a big deal.
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, Roger, I know you recently wrote an article about this exact subject in your blog recently, so we'll link to that in the show notes of today's program. But as always, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Samantha.
Absolutely. Once again, that was K-State and Washburn University School of Law professor Roger McEowen joining us for a conversation on charitable remainder trusts. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today. We are joined now by a very special guest and a familiar voice that everyone tuning in will know very well. And his name is Gus van Der Hoeven. He was a very long-time showrunner here on Agriculture Today. He served as the voice of Stop, Look, and Listen for what, Gus, 40 years?
40 years or a little bit longer, but of course earlier it was with Paul DeWeese, but the longest time with Eric Atkinson. That's really what stands out now and what we remember with Eric.
Absolutely. And you did your last edition of Stop, Look, and Listen with Eric while he was ending his time here earlier this year. But I thought it would be a wonderful way to summarize the year by having you back on. And that's really why you're here today, is I wanted you to do a special Christmas holiday season wrap-up edition of Stop, Look, and Listen for listeners.
I'm glad you asked. This time of the year, the holiday season, which for me starts actually after Thanksgiving slowly, and you see already Christmas trees up and all that, and you hear in the stores when you go the Christmas songs mixed in with Jolly Jolly and all that. I always have difficulty with that because I grew up, remember, and I've said that before on the show, 5th of December was our St. Nicholas, European. Had nothing to do with Christmas. Nothing. Except you have gifts, but anonymous, to your friends and family members. And each gift has to have a poem. And you're trying to pull the other's leg. And I can tell you stories there, but I won't do that now, which really there are some fantastic poems made by people who are not usually making poetry.
Sure.
They rhyme and somehow. But anyway, so St. Nicholas, the 5th of December, is well past, but Thanksgiving is a connection with the feeling of giving thanks and then moving to Christmas. And I was glad to be on the air, and many times I was in the past, actually every year. And yes, you express yourself, although Christmas itself, it does not change. So the stories which I might come up with, or the feelings, may change from year to year. And although this year I really felt very strong about where we are as a world, and that I try to express. And at the end, when I wish the wish, Merry Christmas, I couldn't do that this year. I did ask each of us to celebrate Christmas and to look forward to the 2023rd year. But I could not say, like we see on our cards, Happy Christmas, cherry this and all that. I think we as people, nations, are at a stage where it is really important we learn from mistakes we have made. And that's why, in my way, and I'm not trying to preach, I'm surely not a preacher, in my way I'm trying to say, celebrate Christmas, whatever way you celebrate it, but let it be the meaning of Christmas.
Absolutely. And we'll hear more about that in your selection that you just did for us that you recorded. We'll hear from you now in that recording. But, Gus, I just wanted to say thank you because you didn't have to come back. You didn't have to join me and sit down and record with me, pretty much a stranger. You didn't have to do that. But I know I'm so appreciative of it because you are such a wonderful storyteller. And I know that listeners ending with you this year, I'm sure it's a comfort for them as well.
Glad to be here. I feel honored that you asked me, and I thank you. Because for me, Kansas, the people of Kansas, in all their diversity, western, rural, towns, cities, that's whom I worked with when I was the extension specialist in my field, is the people of Kansas. And I wish them to celebrate Christmas. And yes, I will say it now, Merry Christmas.
Well, thank you, Gus. I appreciate that. We'll tune into the selection that he has put together for us now.
When Samantha asked me if I would come on the air for the holiday season, I could not believe that a year had passed. We have celebrated Thanksgiving, which for me sets the stage for the holiday season. I remember last year going to the farm with our Dutch family guest to look for the perfect Christmas tree. Of course, it would be a cedar, but unlike other years, I had not done any earlier scouting. We drove to the farm. The weather was sunny. Once at the farm, we drove around and looked. There were plenty of cedars, but we did not see the perfect Christmas tree. We returned to a tree I had seen earlier, but Susanna said, "That's not a tree, that's a big shrub." She was partly right. The tree I had my eye on was crowding in on a row of trees I'd planted years ago. It looked like a mother hen, sitting on her eggs, brooding. The trouble was, Susanna would, back in the old country, select the perfect fir from among all perfect trimmed Christmas trees on a Christmas tree lot with festive wreath, soft music, and everybody happy with the Christmas spirit. And here we were, driving on a sunny afternoon on the quiet farm, truck engines softly humming. I still hear her say, "That's no tree." Susanna saying that made me think of the fairy queen who was pulled through the forest in a sleigh by horses handled by her coachman. She chose a disformed tree, and it was hauled to her palace, and it was made the Christmas tree in the big hall with the roaring log fire and table set. In a quiet way, Susanna had challenged me. I stopped the truck, started a saw, and cut the tree. We hoisted it on the truck. At home, I set the tree in water for a good soak overnight. Looking at the tree, I saw the Christmas tree it would become. The next morning, I set a shrub tree on the stand. I walked around it and slowly, carefully shaped it. Hidden in the bulk was the perfect tree. It took a while to make the Christmas tree come out and present itself. But when it did, it was good. Very good. I was glad Susanna had gone into town. When she returned from her errands, the tree was standing inside on the place where all trees have stood. It stood there straight and gracious, ready to be decorated. I let Anneke and Suzanne do the decorating. When finished, Suzanne said, "It is a beautiful tree," and I knew she meant it. That was last year. Where did the year go? Much has happened. I'm thinking of the people in Ukraine and other parts of the world where there is war or conflict. I think of Israel and Palestine. Yes, we will sing peace on earth. At times, I too can be cynical, very cynical. I try to understand. Both Anneke and I remember World War II, peace on earth. But I also know there's wheat in the cold earth, wheat which has sprouted, and when spring comes, will stool and grow. In July, the wheat will be tall and blowing in the wind, ready to be harvested. There is the promise. Shaping the tree each year, I see, near the wide base of the tree, life as a young person experiences it. There is so much, might even be overwhelming. Then, as the branches are trimmed and the shape of the tree is coming clearer, so might a life find its purpose, and slowly there's some order, which becomes even more so as we go to the top of the tree, when finally we reach the very top, the pinnacle. Now we're old, and we have lived. The tree carries its ornaments. Many have meanings. Experience lived. Near the top it is simple. There are not that many branches to hang ornaments on. No need. There is the top. To all of you, celebrate Christmas. And my hope for 2023 is peace on earth.
Once again, that was Gus van Der Hoeven reflecting on the holiday season this year. We'll be back with more shortly on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are ending the year's programming with our friends from the Beef Cattle Institute for their Ask the Experts segment. We are joined by K-State experts Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster.
Welcome to Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts, where our experts will answer your questions. Happy to have you listening with us, and happy to have these guys with me today as well. Dr. Phillip Lancaster, who does nutrition here at K-State.
Hi, Brad.
Dr. Bob Larson, who does repro here. I had to pause and see exactly what you did.
What do I do? Yeah.
This week I'm going to say reproduction and epidemiology.
Hello.
And I'm Brad White, and we'll be sharing with you today our opportunity to answer some of your questions. As always, if you have a question for us, you can email us at bci@ksu.edu. Each of these guys will get a chance to answer, and as they respond, they'll get a score of up to 10 points. Today's question is one we get frequently, which is related to mineral feeding, and the actual listener question is, how should I manage my mineral supplementation plan to promote a good breed up on my cows? I'm going to interpret it as a good first service conception rate. Phillip?
I think the most important thing with mineral supplementation is intake. If we provide mineral as a free choice mineral in a mineral tub or mineral feeder, not every cow eats a proper amount. And so to get a good breed up, you've got to have the mineral nutrition for each individual cow, not the herd average. And so I think one of the best ways to do it is to provide that mineral supplement in a hand-fed feed supplement that you're probably already delivering to those cows this time of year anyway. Just mix it right into that feed supplement and deliver it all at the same time, and you ensure everybody is eating it.
Great points. I like the individual management, the intake, but it is going to be labor intensive. 8 points for Phillip out of the gate, Bob.
That's actually a pretty good answer. I wish I had gotten to go first because I would have said something like intake as well. But I do think it's important to look at the minerals that we want to supply to the cattle and make sure that we're providing a good mineral package. That's easy to say. It's a little harder to define exactly what I mean. But basically, we start with the macro minerals of calcium and phosphorus. And I do prefer hand-delivered, but a free choice is also acceptable if we need to. And then you look at some trace minerals as well. And to be honest, from a reproductive standpoint, in many, many herds, a relatively straightforward mineral package will provide everything they need to have a good breed up. But every once in a while, you run into a herd, and usually it's because of some soil type differences or possibly some plant differences, where you do have some trace mineral antagonisms and some issues where you need a more specific trace mineral package for that area. My answer is, on the trace mineral side, some people are too worried about it because, gosh, there's a lot of herds that do pretty well with a pretty basic package. And then a few herds aren't worried enough about it because there are some times when you can have some antagonisms that really make a difference. So know your situation.
And I think great answer, because it varies by region. Even within relatively small regions, you can see big differences. So 8 points for Bob as well. Phillip, back to you. As a follow-up to this question, I'm really looking at promoting reproductive success, right? Especially early in that period. Beyond individual feeding, anything I should do relative to my mineral, or I'll even open it up broader to my nutrition program.
Well, just making sure those cows are in good body condition score at the beginning of the breeding season, or even really at calving, is the most important thing. From the mineral package standpoint, just making sure that it does balance with, like Bob said, the conditions you're at in your ranch, your soil types, any antagonisms that you have to deal with, and whether you need a chelated mineral in that to manage some of those antagonisms, or making sure that it matches with your forage as well. And so minerals from different parts of the country are not formulated for your particular area, and so making sure you're getting something that's formulated for your type of forages in your particular area.
All right. Well, I'm going to cheat maybe in that a lot of times we also deliver vitamins, particularly vitamin A or A, D, and E. And vitamin A is something that if they're low, we can see some negative effects with reproduction as well. So I'm going to throw the vitamin A package in because I want to look at that and see how much is being delivered in my mineral package, and do I need to add some additional. We can even use an injectable vitamin A if necessary. So I'm going to throw vitamin A in there with my mineral package discussion.
Excellent. I think both of those are great points, but adding the vitamin A, especially when we're in a drought year, really important. Bob ends up with 9, Phillip with 8. Thank you for joining us today.
That concludes this year's programming. Thank you so much for tuning in this year, and I hope you all have a very happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. We'll be back with more in 2023 on Agriculture Today.